In today's video, I'm going to be making a cake of the Grinch. So I have made one of these already a few years ago, but this time he's going to be dressed as Father Christmas. So I'm starting with a template that I've printed off. Now, I know I've got an 8-inch cake and a 6-inch one in, so I've tried to print my template so it matches about the size of those cakes that I've already got. I'm probably not going to need the whole of the 6-inch one because it's just going to kind of go on the top of his hat there. So we'll trim that one down so that it's more of a crescent shape. If you're wondering why the cakes look so kind of moist and sticky, I didn't realise when I took them out the freezer because I just buy them ready-made and then I freeze them. I get them from a company called Sweet Success. But I must have pulled out the vegan ones, which have oil in instead of butter, so it makes them a little bit oilier. They still taste really great, but I just didn't realise I'd picked out the vegan ones. I'm just going to place these on a board. Just make sure the board is bigger than your cakes. And then we're going to push those together. I've got some red buttercream made up, so we're going to get that between the layers of sponge. And we're just adding our second layer. And I will put links below the video to everything that I've used. So let's see if it roughly fits with our template. It's got a bit more shape on the template look than my cakes have. So we'll just cut out those little bits there now around sort of the side of the face and the hat. So even though I use a template often for this, it still doesn't end up the exact same shape. And you have to bear in mind that when you are covering the cake in like ganache later or even buttercream and then a layer of fondant, it usually ends up getting a little bit bigger than what you thought it was going to be at the beginning. So I've added a little bit extra onto the top of the hat. I think probably I went a little bit too big with the top of the hat. And then I'm just adding one of my offcuts in a smaller layer that will make like the little fur trim on the hat. So now I'm going to cut it and curve it all so it's a slightly more 3D shape. And I'm going to cut out or deepen the area where his face goes. I probably went a little bit too deep with the face because I ended up with his face very, very far set in the cake. I'm going to just try and take out almost like a semicircle for each eye. And then just trim a little bit off the edge of the beard just to curve that as well. And I've added some cake where his moustache is because I thought if not that would be a lot of icing. But you'll see a bit later in the video I end up just pulling off the bit of cake that I put on for his moustache because it just didn't really stay in place. So I try to stick it down with a bit of buttercream. And then I'm going to cover the whole thing in a layer of ganache mixed with my buttercream. So I couldn't decide whether to use buttercream or ganache on this one, so I'm just going to mix the two together. I only actually had a little bit of buttercream left, so I didn't put too much in with the ganache. I overheated it a little bit. I've been doing that in every video so far for a while. I've been overheating it by accident. But yeah, you're going to put a thin layer over and then just use a flexible smoother, just because you can bend this to the shape of the cake and just scrape it all over. It's very tricky getting into like the face area, so some areas I found it harder to smooth than others. I just used some green food colouring to colour my fondant for this one, and I'll put links to what I used below the video. So in areas now where I didn't get the cake quite to the exact right shape, or that need like a little bit more volume, I'm adding just some tiny pieces of fondant. Now you don't have to do that, but where his eyebrows are kind of furrowed over in an angry expression, I think I needed more volume there. So I'm going to roll the fondant. I want to keep it fairly thin, but I have to bear in mind that I'm going to be pressing into it later to add hairlines. And if I go super thin, it'll just cut through and show the ganache underneath. So we're just using different modelling tools to kind of press in around the eyes to give it a bit more shape. Using a balling tool to kind of get the shape of the eye socket. Just going to trim any extra off from around the bottom of the face. Then I'm going to use a Dresden tool. So I've got a metal one here, you can use a plastic one. And I'm just putting in individual little lines for the hair. These hairlines get a little bit longer as we come to the outer edge of the face and slightly shorter near the middle and near like the nose area. So I've gone for a slightly darker green for the nose. Just roll it into a little ball and then slightly more pointed at the underside of it. Push that on in place. And then let's just give him a couple of little nostrils, just pushing in the wider end of my Dresden tool there. Now when I watch the film, it does look like he's got a bit of texture on his nose, almost like a dog nose that has like that bit of texture. So I'm just using some small round tipped piping nozzles to create that texture. So we're going to start with some white semicircles just pushed in place. I think the eyes are probably the most important part of making it look like who it's meant to be. That and making him green, I suppose. And I'm just going to give him sort of like a bottom eyelid at the bottom of each eye. I don't think he quite has these on the template, but I don't think I got the eye to the right shape, so they're on there now. So next I'm going to roll some red fondant for the hat. We don't need a lot for the hat because there's not a lot of red on show. Just cut any extra off from around the edges. And that bottom eyelid is just, it's a bit too obvious. So what I'm going to do is just add an extra piece of paste in there that kind of blends between that bottom eyelid and the face. And I'll probably have to put some more hairlines in that as well, just to make it not look like a separate piece. And before I get further on with like the beard and the bits that are going to be white, I'm going to add the dusting to darken the green on his face now. Otherwise I'll end up with it all over the beard. So I'm using dried powder dust. Again, I'll link below the video to which ones I'm using. These are all edible powders, and I'm just using a dry brush to put that colour on there. Again, have a look at an image of the Grinch to see where the areas look darker, but it'd be anywhere that's sort of in shadow. And also the nose, I'm going to darken that nose. Again, going for areas of shadow like in the nostrils and the underside of the nose. These eyeballs look pretty white, so I'm just going to shade them with a little bit of black. Not too much. Then I'm going to use an edible green pen to draw on the eyes, or the iris and pupils. So I'll try and draw an oval on each one. And then I'm going to use some black, again, just the edible pen for the middle. I do actually sell the edible pens and powders on my online shop as well, guys. So I'm going to use some Rejuvenator Spirit now and mix some of the powder in with that to create a paint. And I'm just using this instead of the pen now to just go around the very edge of the iris, just darkening it a little bit. You might find it easier to use a paintbrush, or you might find it easier to use the edible pen. I tend to swap between the two because I can never decide which I prefer. So I'm going to take some of that darker green that I used for his nose, and we're going to roll some little pieces for his eyebrows because they're a little bit darker in green. So I'm going to stick those just above each eye. Now, because he looks like he's kind of frowning a little bit, or a lot, I'm going to put that right across so it kind of almost covers the very top edge of the eye. And then I'm going to add some hairlines in. I'm using my craft knife to do it, so I can almost like cut individual pieces into it. Or you can stick individual strands on if you want, instead of one big piece. Just going to add a tiny bit of powder dust just to darken that a little bit more as well. And then I'm going to very carefully try and add a tiny white ball of fondant into each eye. Next, let's roll out some white, and we're going to do all the white areas, which is most of him. So I can't go too thin with this, otherwise when I do press quite firmly for the hairlines, it will just cut through and you'll see that ganache. So I've cut kind of a curve in there for the shape of his face. And I want you to be able to see the edge that's against his face, because when I look at the template, you can kind of see the edge of his beard, because obviously it's a fake beard that he's wearing, so we want to be able to see that. And then I'm just going to trim it down so it fits to underneath the hat, trim any extra off from around the edge. So once the white is smoothed down for his beard, I want to add some lines in. I'm just going to use the Dresden tool. I'm pressing fairly firmly, so you do need to make sure your ganache is set underneath. I'm kind of glad I use ganache now instead of just buttercream underneath, because it does give me a firmer base so I can press harder with these lines without crushing the cake underneath. Buttercream probably would have been a little bit soft, and I would have probably gone into the cake. So I'm trying not to make the lines completely straight, and you can see I'm pressing pretty firmly so it kind of cuts through, especially as I get near the edges. Kind of waving them a tiny bit or flicking them up and downwards, just so it gives the beard a little bit more movement. And we can always add extra individual pieces of hair afterwards if we want at the end, just to make it look a bit more 3D. Okay, so I'm going to do this all over the beard. Okay, so just working out if I need a little gap there or not. You can also use some scissors, just make sure they're a completely clean pair. This is a pair that I only use for cake decorating. So they are nail scissors, but I've never used them for nails. You can just move the hairs about a bit more as well once you've cut them. Okay, so you can see now I don't have the cake anymore for the moustache. So what I'm going to do is I am going to make it in fondant, which is probably a bit thick, but the cake moustache just was dropping off and getting in the way. So I'm going to roll two like teardrops or almost carrot shapes. Fairly long and thin at one end so we can curl that over, and then we're just going to put lines in that go all the way along the length. And then we're going to stick that in place so it just covers the edge of the beard. Now, in some of the clips from the movie, you can see his mouth, and on some you can't. I think it depends what kind of facial expression he is pulling. But for this one, we're going for no mouth because it makes my life a little bit easier. Okay, so once the mustache is on, we can cover the fur trim part of the hat. I have gone a little bit thinner with this than I have with the beard, even though we still need to put hairlines in it. Trim off any extra. And then just the same as we did with the beard, we're just going to put some hairlines in all the way along. Again, trying to press pretty firmly so it almost cuts through so that you've got what looks like individual pieces of hair coming down just over the face a little bit. You can use the scissors to help with that. Or you can stick on individual pieces of hair. So I haven't made him a body out of cake because I wasn't going to bother adding it, but I think he needs something under his beard, so I'm just going to add a big piece of red fondant. You don't actually need to make it super thick for this. The body doesn't need to stick out a lot. And then I'm also just going to add a ball of fondant so it looks like one of the furry buttons on his outfit. Okay, then just a small piece of red in there, just rolled nice and thin for each arm. And I think what I want to do is make him holding a cookie, but we'll put that in later. So now for shading his beard. So I've got some of that powder colour, so I've used some black and blue, and I've mixed it with that rejuvenator, or you can use clear alcohol or lemon essence. You can mix it with water, it just doesn't make it quite as nice a kind of paint. But the more liquid you have, so the more transparent it is, the more it will run into the cracks in the beard. Hopefully you can see it kind of running into the hairlines when I paint it on. And I'm just going to repeat the same thing on the hat as I have done on the beard, and also exactly the same on the mustache as well. By using the rejuvenator spirit or clear alcohol instead of water as well, it dries so much quicker. It kind of evaporates, so you're not left with the taste of like alcohol or rejuvenator spirit on your cake. Just always make sure it's something fully edible that you mix with your powders, by the way, guys. Then I'm going to put some dry powder dust on for the highlights of his hat. So I'm using the Petal palette for this. It is edible powder. I know every video people ask if it's makeup. It's not. It is an edible powder palette. Just adding a tiny bit more shading in some parts. Ooh, just have to be careful not to knock off any individual strands of fondant you've put on there. And then I'm doing another bit of white. This will be the cuff for his sleeve when I make the forearm. So pop that to one side. Now for the cookie. The cookie. I've got some gingerbread mix that I'm just going to roll out, and I'm going to cut to the shape of one of the cookies that's in the film. So I do have a video on how to make gingerbread, guys, and I will put the link in the video now so you can see that. Oh, it's cracked a little bit, but I think for this it's okay. Just one single little gingerbread is all I need for this one. And I've gone for the reindeer shaped biscuit. So before I start icing, I am going to draw on with my edible pen the rough lines of where I want to pipe. And then I'm going to start by piping in the whites of the eyes. And then I'm going to pipe some like pale brown circles for the nostrils, and then I'm going to go for darker brown in the middle. And then try and carefully go around the outside. I don't have a steady hand, but I thought this design was definitely easier than doing the Father Christmas cookie because there were fewer colours and lines and details involved. So carefully going around the eyes. So it's not quite identical to the one in the movie, but I think it's close enough, I reckon. Piping on the antlers. Piping on the outline, and then I'm just filling it in the middle. Now, I think my royal icing was maybe a little bit too thick for filling in this middle bit, but I gave it 5 minutes and it kind of spread out a little bit, so it was a slightly better texture. Okay, so we've got a piece of modelling paste for the arm that I've wrapped in red because it's tall and it's thin and it needs to be strong and have lots of support. So the fur trim is going to go on top of that. Forgot his little pupils. And then I want to make him a hand, so I've got some green left over from the face. We're going to cut out a thumb. Just around the edges a little bit, and then we're going to cut in for some fingers. They want to be pointy at the ends. And then let's just shape that so it's a bit more hand-like. Pressing in where your fingers would join it like the knuckles. or pressing in where your fingers would bend, I should say. Bend them slightly, and then we're going to add some hairlines, because of course the Grinch is furry or hairy everywhere. I'm going to stick that in place on there. You can use a bit of edible glue, or if you've got some of the royal icing left from the cookie, you can use that to stick his hand on. Then we're going to place his cookie in. I did wait for the icing on the cookie to dry before I did this. And then we're going to bend his fingers round in place so it looks like he's grabbing hold of that cookie. And then I'll just need to shade the hand a little bit so the green matches more with the green on his face. Okay, I think he's done. So there he is, all finished. Now all that's left to do is to take a slice. Here we go, a vegan chocolate cake with non-vegan buttercream. Thanks for watching the video, guys. Don't forget to check out my new book and my online tutorials as well for more in-depth detail of how to make things. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope to see you next time.